Welcome to the FACC Briefing. I'm Scott Hinds, Advisor for Media and Outreach for the Federation of Americans for Consumer Choice. Today's briefing is a FACC presentation where we cut through the regulatory noise and talk plainly and directly about matters important to consumers and the financial services professionals who serve them. I'm joined today by FACC's most familiar voice, Kim O'Brien, our Chief Executive Officer and founder. Kim, great to have you here.
Scott, it's really great to be here. I have to say we're launching this briefing at a very opportune moment for FACC's members and for all those consumers served by our membership. There are some very positive developments that we can report today, and more good news may be ahead.
Absolutely, and that's very much appreciated, I'm sure, by all of our supporters. And whether you're a financial professional, an insurance agent, or a consumer trying to plan for retirement, what's been happening in the regulatory world these last few weeks directly affects you. That's why a forum like this matters. It gives us a chance to break it down in plain English. And that's exactly what we're here to do today. But before we get into today's headlines, let us take a moment to introduce the organization behind this briefing.
FACC is the Federation of Americans for Consumer Choice. We serve as a voice for independent distribution and providers like you who deliver guaranteed insurance products to retirement-minded consumers, including life insurance, long-term care insurance, and annuities. Our mission is to preserve consumer access to the products and the services Americans need to live securely and retire with confidence.
And at its core, FACC is focused on protecting consumer choice. FACC advocates for level playing fields for independent insurance professionals and workable laws, regulations, and compliance standards that ensure independent advisors and agents can continue serving clients fairly and effectively. So when FACC engages in advocacy, whether it be a high-profile litigation, regulatory comment letters, lobbying state officials, monitoring the development of NAIC model laws, the goal is straightforward: preserve access, preserve competition, and preserve the ability of consumers to choose from a full range of guaranteed insurance and retirement income solutions.
And that is exactly the lens for everything we're discussing today. Whether it's federal fiduciary policy, state best interest standards, or NAIC model reform, FACC is there to make sure that it's right balance between consumer protection and consumer freedom, and to make sure lawmakers and policymakers understand the role of independent distribution to serving clients' needs. We believe in the marketplace and are constantly guarding against overzealous or one-sided regulations that can do more harm than good for consumers.
All right, Kim, for listeners who may be coming to this fresh, walk us through what just happened with the Biden administration's 2024 fiduciary rule.
Well, Scott, here's the short version. On March 12th of this year, federal judge Jeremy Kernodle in the Eastern District of Texas officially vacated the Biden administration 2024 fiduciary rule, more formally known as the Retirement Security Rule. This rule was a sweeping attempt by the Biden Department of Labor to extend ERISA fiduciary duties to virtually every professional retirement investment recommendation, covering just about every recommendation and sale of any annuity in connection with an IRA or a 401k plan. It would have applied almost across the board to rollovers and annuities purchased in the tax qualified marketplace. The problem was it flew in the face of ERISA itself. The cornerstone legislation adopted in 1975 governing retirement plans and critically echoed the very same Obama-era fiduciary rule that the Fifth Circuit already vacated back in 2018. FACC argued that Biden DOL was resurrecting the same flawed approach with new thinly veiled packaging and sought a preliminary injunction to block the 2024 rule from ever taking effect. Judge Kernodle agreed with FACC, both that a stay was warranted and ultimately that the Biden fiduciary rule violated ERISA and must be struck down.
Well, Kim, from a practitioner's standpoint, what was the real-world threat that this rule posed?
Scott, the concern was enormous. If this rule had taken effect, it would have fundamentally changed the way fixed insurance products, annuities especially, are sold and recommended in the retirement marketplace, which of course represents well over half of the total annuity market. These are products sold historically through well established business models and practices with deeply rooted compensation systems that encourage careful promotion of retirement products and development of client relationships, all through an independent distribution system that favors product innovation and customer choice. When you impose fiduciary duties on every retirement conversation, you do not just add paperwork. You fundamentally disrupt how consumers access professional services associated with the purchase of needed financial products. The rule would have driven up costs, reduced the availability of these products in the marketplace, and ironically, harmed the very consumers it claimed to protect. Middle market Americans, people without large pools of money who cannot afford big investment advisory fees. They would have found it harder to access the retirement planning guidance that is built into and comes with the services provided by independent professionals who sell annuity products. That's not hypothetical. We saw it happen in the aftermath of the short-lived Obama fiduciary rule.
Now, Kim, FAC was the lead plaintiff in this case. What were the key legal arguments, and what is the effect of the final judgment?
It's significant on multiple levels and cause for really great celebration. But as I will explain all that later, the battle is not necessarily over. Our core legal argument in the case was that the Biden DOL fiduciary rule suffered from the same fundamental defects as the 2018 version that the Fifth Circuit struck down. Specifically, that it gutted the longstanding, well accepted five-part test established by the DOL 50 years ago to define fiduciary status under ERISA. The Biden DOL tried to argue its newest fiduciary rule was somehow different from the Obama fiduciary rule and could be reconciled with the Fifth Circuit case that struck down the Obama fiduciary rule. Two federal courts in Texas, Judge Kernodle in the FACC case and Judge O'Connor in the parallel case brought by the other trade associations, didn't buy it. And then the Trump administration came into office. They took a fresh look at the Biden fiduciary rule and decided not to defend it. The new DOL dismissed an ongoing appeal related to the stay of the Biden fiduciary rule and then acquiesced to a judgment striking down the rule itself. So just a couple weeks ago, Judge Kernodle formally vacated the 2024 fiduciary rule, and it's now officially gone. I said it in a statement at the time, and I'll say it again here. We are grateful to the Trump administration for bringing a fresh perspective to these longstanding issues. While we are confident that FACC would ultimately prevail either way, because the proposed Biden fiduciary rule was incompatible with ERISA, it was good that the new Trump administration helped accelerate the demise of the fiduciary rule. And let me add that FACC is especially happy for consumers who will benefit from the most continued availability of marketplace choices and competitively priced financial products.
Kim, that all sounds great, but I understand that FAC is also continuing to challenge the so-called 2020 final interpretation, which remains a separate but closely related matter. Can you summarize what that is and why that one's still a concern?
Sure, the 2020 final interpretation, Scott, in some ways is an even bigger concern to FACC because it was, in our view, a more stealth attempt at what I would call the deep state regulators to achieve essentially the same results of turning most and nearly all financial professionals into fiduciaries. It did that through a very strained, even tortured reinterpretation of the historical five-part test that watered down and distorted each of the five parts of that test. That is why FACC and FACC alone sued the Department of Labor in a separate lawsuit to challenge that guidance.
I see. That sounds serious. So where does that stand now?
Well, we have potential good news on that front. Shortly after the Texas federal courts vacated the 2024 fiduciary rule, The DOL issued a formal notice in the Federal Register implementing the vacatur and thereby restoring the five-part test. And in doing so, at the same time, the DOL announced it was withdrawing the 2020 final interpretation. It explained that because FACC's lawsuit and another lawsuit brought by the American Securities Association had succeeded in invalidating at least portions of the 2020 final interpretation, the guidance was no longer reliable, according to the DOL, and they were no longer confident in the soundness of the remaining portions. So the DOL determined the 2020 final interpretation in its entirety should be abandoned.
Well, Kim, that sounds fantastic. FACC must be ready to declare all out victory, having prevailed in the 2024 Fiduciary Rule Challenge, and now with this latest news that the 2020 final interpretation is being rolled back, right?
Well, not quite yet. We're certainly very pleased with the direction of these developments, but we are carefully analyzing the DOL's latest notice in the Federal Register and evaluating exactly what this all means relative to our 2020 final interpretation lawsuit, which remains an open case. We hope to talk more with the DOL in the next few weeks about how to bring the case to a close, but we are only doing so if we are satisfied that essentially the status quo, what existed before the Obama and Biden administration headed down this long winding path of manipulation and constant litigation over who is a fiduciary, has been reinstated. We want to get these issues fully behind us so that financial professionals can get back to serving their clients and delivering on the promises of retirement security without having to look over their shoulder all the time on these regulatory matters.
Kim, that's a great point. So let me just ask you one last question. I've heard the Trump DOL signaled a while ago its intention to issue some kind of new fiduciary rule or guidance, possibly by May of this year. Do we know anything about that?
Well, as best as we can tell, Scott, it appears that the Department of Labor does not intend to engage in any further formal rulemaking, at least for the time being. Our impression right now is that the DOL has stepped back from its so-called spring 2025 agenda, which did contain a placeholder for yet another investment advice rule. It was scheduled for release sometime in May 2026, which of course is right now around the corner. But we're hoping that that has all been usurped by last month's DOL Federal Register notice, which we were discussing earlier in this briefing. It reinstates the five-part test and withdraws the 2020 final interpretation. We really hope that that was the last word on this subject so that we can all turn the page. It is notable that the DOL indicated in its accompanying press release that it had no current plans to engage in notice and comment rulemaking. But it also said that the DOL would consider whether any additional guidance is appropriate. We hope the DOL leaves well enough alone. In any event, as always, FACC will continue to be highly vigilant. We will continue to monitor every step closely, and FACC will be prepared, of course, to comment, engage, and if necessary, litigate. But for now, the baseline in this vital industry issue surrounding the fiduciary duty has been reset, and for the good. And the baseline is far better for consumers and financial providers than it was only a few months ago.
Well, that is all excellent context, so everyone can now better understand what they've been reading about in the trade press. And let me say, I know these battles are never truly over, but it sounds like, as you said at the outset, Kim, this is a very good moment for FACC, and things are certainly trending in the right direction. I hope that everyone can appreciate that these positive developments are the result of a lot of hard work and a great deal of investment going back many years. Kudos, Kim, to FACC.
Well, thank you, Scott. I want people to understand that FACC exists because independent distribution and the consumers served by independent distributors need their own voice that isn't tilted towards or beholden to any single product or distribution channel. A voice that fights for consumers' access to full spectrum of financial products and advice. Every initiative in our 2026 agenda at its core is a consumer protection effort. We believe the marketplace, when properly regulated, not overregulated, is the best mechanism for serving the retirement security needs of Americans, and will keep fighting to make that case. And I'd say to financial professionals listening, FACC is your advocate. We care singularly about independent agents who may otherwise lack a true voice in the rulemaking and lawmaking process governing the financial services industry. Your ability to serve your clients, to recommend the products that are genuinely right for them, is something we fight for every single day. Stay engaged, stay informed, and know that FACC is working on your behalf, or as we like to say, FACC has your back.
Well, Kim O'Brien, thank you. This has been a fantastic inaugural edition of the FACC Briefing. We'll be back with updates as the regulatory landscapes continue to evolve. And to our listeners and viewers, if you would like to stay connected with FACC's work, visit factchoice.com. And if you found today's briefing valuable, share it with a colleague. The more voices we have advocating for consumer choice, the better.